Good morning, New York. Good evening from Jakarta. The 50th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The professional agenda for this meeting is peace building and sustaining peace, pandemics and the challenges of sustaining peace. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council Professional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon and Ms. Sarah Cliff, Director of Center of International Cooperation, New York University. It is decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2020/765, a letter dated 30th July 2020 from the Permanent Representative of Indonesia to the United Nations addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept note on the item under consideration. I wish to warmly welcome the Secretary General, the distinguished Deputy Prime Ministers, Ministers, and other high-level representatives. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Madam President, honorable ministers, distinguished permanent representatives, my dear friend Ban Ki-moon, Ms. Sarah Cliff, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking the Indonesian presidency for convening this open debate on pandemics and the challenges of sustaining peace. The concept of sustaining peace is essentially about positive peace as opposed to simply ending wars. In other words, it's the idea that the international community accompanies a country well beyond the point of simply putting down guns to the point where people feel protected and represented, where trust and the social fabric are going in the right direction and not in the wrong direction. But the unprecedented challenges from COVID-19 clearly risk pushing things in the wrong direction. As I highlighted in my previous briefings to the Council, the COVID-19 pandemic has devastated communities and economies throughout the world, affecting the poorest and most vulnerable the most. The pandemic threatens not only hard-won development and peace-building gains, but also risks exacerbating conflicts or fomenting new ones. Questions are growing about the effectiveness of health systems, social services, trust in institutions and systems of governance. All of this means that our commitment to sustaining peace is more urgent than ever. The challenge of this pandemic underscores like never before the imperative of coherent, multidimensional and cross-pillar responses along the integrated logic of the Sustainable Development Goals. We know that conflict-sensitive and coherent preventive approaches that help address the health and humanitarian crisis will help deliver sustainable peace. But as we scan the horizon, I see three key dangers. First, the erosion of public trust. Pandemics can undermine faith in governments and public institutions. The perception that authorities are mishandling the crisis or not being transparent or favoring political allies can lead to public disillusion in governments and its institutions. Second, the destabilization of the global economic order. I'm particularly concerned about the effects of heightened socio-economic vulnerabilities fueled by an unprecedented global economic crisis. Without concerted action, inequalities, global poverty, and the potential for instability and violence could grow for years. Third, the weakening of the social fabric, represented in, for example, the narrowing of civic space and the closing of avenues for democratic process and legitimate expression of grievances. We have seen many peaceful protests and, in a number of countries, unfortunately, COVID-19 has been an excuse for harsh crackdowns and a spike in state repression. At least 23 countries have postponed national elections or referenda, and almost twice as many have postponed subnational votes. Excellencies, despite challenges, the pandemic also creates opportunities for peace. The appeal for a global ceasefire earlier this year prompted positive responses from governments and non-state actors across the globe. A number of conflict parties took steps to de-escalate and stop fighting. Yet, regrettably, in many instances, the pandemic did not move the parties to suspend hostilities or agree to a permanent ceasefire. Last month's adoption of Security Council Resolution 2532, which demanded a general and immediate cessation of hostilities in all situations on its agenda, is a step in the right direction, but much more is needed to translate early gains into concrete action on the ground. The Council also plays an important role in bringing its influence to bear for an investment in prevention. In the current context, that means several things. First, our responses to the pandemic must be conflict-sensitive, starting with a multidimensional analysis that looks at how the pandemic affects underlying risks and drive conflict. Second, inclusion is critical in the design of humanitarian and development responses to pandemics. Dialogues, especially with communities and marginalized groups, help rebuild trust and enhance social cohesion. In particular, we must find avenues for far stronger engagement with women's groups who play such a pivotal role in securing peace at the community level. There are also critical rebuilders of trust, which is often absent in fragile and fractured communities, and without which public health messaging and behavioral change to slow the pandemic simply does not take root. Young people are also essential to peace-building solutions. Third, sustaining peace requires an integrated and coherent approach through strong collaboration across humanitarian, development, and peace actors. For example, to sustain peace, we need to ensure that humanitarian challenges are fully addressed in a comprehensive way. Lebanon is a case in point. We also need to build ever stronger partnerships with governments, regional and sub-regional organizations, the private sector, and civil society actors. And we must underscore the importance of ensuring that international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and others, integrate sustaining peace as a priority and as a core element of COVID-19 recovery strategies and building back better. The Council's ongoing collaboration with the Peacebuilding Commission is critical. Your complementary efforts can help marshal a collaborative response to the peacebuilding impact of the pandemic, drawing on lessons at previous health crises such as the Ebola outbreak. My forthcoming report next month, a key input to the 2020 review of the UN peacebuilding architecture, highlights substantial progress in fostering a systemic focus on prevention and a multidimensional approach to peace in closer alignment with the development and human rights pillars and humanitarian actors. Fourth, we need to be flexible and tailor our approach to peacebuilding needs in the context of the pandemic. The Peacebuilding Fund has swiftly adjusted the work on the ground and identified new areas of support in response to COVID-19, seeking ways to shore up relations among communities, counter hate speech, reduce stigmatization, and strengthen inclusion. Unfortunately, the demand for the fund continues to outpace supply. We hope to approve $2010 million in projects this year, $2010 million US dollars, but that is still far short of the quantum leap I have called for in this Council and elsewhere. With a global spike in violence against women and girls, the Spotlight Initiative has repurposed some $20 million towards COVID-19 response, much of this in fragile, conflict-affected or humanitarian settings. But this is only a fraction of what is needed to tackle what has been termed a shadow pandemic. Gender-based violence is a pervasive form of violence and insecurity that undermines our best efforts to build sustainable peace. I'm heartened by some countries' willingness to think about how we can achieve adequate and predictable financing for peace building, which is the best defense against conflict and building a more equal and sustainable future for all. My report in September will make suggestions to that end. Excellencies, COVID-19 is a human tragedy, but we can mitigate the impact by the choices we make. More than ever, multidimensional, coordinated, and conflict-sensitive responses and all-of-society approaches are crucial. They are key to ensuring that peace-building and sustaining peace initiatives go hand in hand with inclusive and sustainable development, anchored in the protection and promotion of human rights, gender equality, and the commitment to leave no one behind. The world is looking to all leaders, including the Council, to address the epic crisis in ways that make a concrete, meaningful, and positive contribution to the lives of people. It is our responsibility to deliver, and I thank you.
You are the only participant.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. We understand he has to leave at 11 a.m. due to another engagement, but we want to thank him again for his participation in today's meeting. So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Madam President of the Security Council, distinguished members of the Security Council, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to deliver these remarks at this high-level open debate of the United Nations Security Council on pandemic and the challenges of sustaining peace. I take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to Her Excellency Retno LP Marsudi, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Indonesia, for inviting me to take part in this important briefing. My special gratitude also goes to today's distinguished briefers and also UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and NYU Center on International Cooperation Director Sarah Cliff. Madam President, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered unprecedented global turmoil over the last 6 months. This includes over 375,000 deaths among more than 20 million confirmed cases around the world and staggering socio-economic disruptions. It is truly astonishing that in response to this pandemic, the world has placed billions of people under lockdown, closed international borders, suspended trade and migration, and temporarily shut down a whole variety of industries, but has not managed to suspend armed conflicts. In this regard, I welcome the unanimous adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2532, which calls for humanitarian ceasefire for 90 days around the world. My fellow elders, and I strongly supported this initiative by His Excellency Secretary General Antonio Guterres. However, several months were wasted in arguments over the details of the text. This has weakened the message that this council needs to send to all warring parties. Now is the time to confront our common enemy. The delayed decision by the council further aggravated the current volatile global security situations in the midst of global fight against COVID-19. The impact of COVID-19 on conflict-affected settings has been much worse than initially thought. This is true not only in terms of the immediate health and humanitarian ramifications, but also in the areas of social cohesion, governance, and the rule of law. Global solidarity has been loosened, while multilateralism has been under threat. This jeopardizes ongoing international efforts to sustain peace, or may even cause a reversal in hard-won peace and security gains to date. Meanwhile, as the pandemic places states under huge pressure, some see opportunities to ramp up attacks from the surge in violence by Boko Haram and other militant groups in Nigeria to growing mob violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, to murders by cartels in Mexico. Some groups use healthcare itself as a weapon and civilian suffering as a tool. In recent years in Syria and Yemen, we have seen hospitals repeatedly bombed, and these countries and others, we have seen hunger deployed as a weapon of war. Unfortunately, we are still in the early stages of this pandemic. Beyond the direct health effects, the economic impacts will be both lasting and severe, with the ripple effects for many fragile and conflict-affected states. For example, we already see Lebanon's political and economic crisis being compounded by the economic effects on COVID-19 on tourism and trade, while Iraq's budget is stretched thin because of the collapse in oil prices. Taking this opportunity, I'd like to extend my deepest condolences to the families and people of Lebanon for the tragic loss of lives and terrible destruction caused by the recent explosion of chemicals. The World Food Programme has warned of the rising risk of famine in conflict zones. For instance, in the Sahel, there are alarming estimates that more than 50 million people will face a food crisis because of the combination of conflicts and COVID-19. But some will find ways to benefit. Militant groups can recruit more easily when young people are desperate for any source of livelihood. And with more than 1.5 million children missing school during lockdowns around the world, Save the Children has warned that 10 million kids may never return to school. This tragedy of opportunities lost will increase the scope of disaffection and radicalization in fragile societies. With these stark realities in mind, today's debate is a timely opportunity to explore various ideas on how to dynamically respond to the current crisis and bolster international efforts to sustain peace in the post-conflict 19 era. Madam President, Excellencies, in 2016, the Security Council and the General Assembly adopted historic joint resolution on peacebuilding, which, together with 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, serve as the United Nations blueprint in assisting conflict-affected countries through peacebuilding efforts. The key messages from these landmark resolutions center on the importance of prioritizing prevention, addressing the root causes of conflict, and devising long-term guiding strategies. This has offered an opportunity to increase the United Nations' focus on preventing conflicts so that the systemic causes of conflict, rather than just the symptoms, are holistically addressed. I believe these lessons learned can also be applied to our current response to COVID-19. UN responses to the current pandemic should be in line with conflict sensitivity, which enables us to address patterns of systematic exclusion and other root causes of conflict. In addition, one of the major peacebuilding goals at the moment should be to strengthen the socio-economic capacities of local communities and populations. I commend Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his leadership in maintaining momentum on sustaining peace even during the pandemic. I also strongly support his plan to emphasize the global responsibility to build back better by strengthening health systems, eradicating extreme poverty, reducing inequalities, and investing in resilient societies. The experience of this crisis should also spur us to change our priorities and our understandings of what threats and values really matter. We need to address the inequalities in our own societies and the gaps in social protection. We see that this virus has flourished disproportionately among marginalized communities, such as migrants without access to decent health care, or those working low-wage jobs, whether in the global south or in the richest countries in the world. In this regard, this experience must remind us that inclusive, just, peaceful societies, as envisaged by SDG 16, are the best way to deliver public health. This pandemic also demonstrates the genuine utility of sustaining peace and proves the benefits of enhancing the humanitarian development peace nexus. The COVID-19 crisis may be limiting the United Nations peacebuilding operations. However, it is also serving as an opportunity to promote greater discussions and activities on emerging threats such as pandemics, inequality, and climate change in the peacebuilding process. In this regard, I'm confident that the 2020 review on the UN peacebuilding architecture will assess the achievements made since 2015 and suggest ways to prevent the current global health crisis from reversing hard-won peace gains. The pandemic has also shown that the United Nations must work more effectively with the various partners, including regional organizations, international financial institutions, the private sector, and civil society. The Peacebuilding Commission is well positioned to help synergize such multi-stakeholder partnership by making full use of its distinctive convening power. Building on its work in support of West African countries during the 2014 Ebola outbreak when I was the Secretary General, it should be encouraged to better fulfill its role in a few key areas. These include raising awareness of country-specific situations, bringing about support, and allowing UN actors to carve out political space and identify entry points for peacebuilding with an in-depth understanding of the operating context and priorities of specific countries. I welcome the PBC's work to promote women and youth in the peacebuilding process, proving how a more inclusive, whole-of-society approach will ultimately yield better outcomes. An increased focus on the role of regional organizations in providing an effective forum for prevention, early detection, and response to potential conflicts is also important moving forward. There are also opportunities to make peacebuilding more inclusive by using digital technologies to bring together a much wider range of people, young people, women, people from remote areas, or marginalized communities who might not be able to travel to traditional peace conferences. But this will only work if we can urgently address the digital divide, which is now ever more important as a result of pandemic-induced lockdowns. Madam President, Excellencies, let me conclude that even during the COVID-19 crisis, the ideals of sustaining peace and the underlying spirit of the twin resolutions, which empowers the crucial role of local communities, women, and young people, should be further built upon. Indeed, I believe the United Nations and its member states have a generational opportunity to use this concept to help build back better, further catalyze greater inclusivity, and steer humanity and our planet towards a more peaceful and sustainable future. The UN must elevate its efforts to harness this pandemic as a gateway to a brighter world. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ban for his briefing. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. I now give the floor to Ms. Sarah Cliff, Director of the Center of International Cooperation, New York University.
Your Excellency Foreign Minister Ibu Retno Marsudi, Secretary General Antonio Guterres and former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Honourable Ministers present, Ambassadors, it is a great honour to participate in this meeting. I will not take up time going over the tragic impacts of COVID-19 in terms of human suffering or the immediate effects in countries on the agenda of the Council, with which I know you are very familiar. Rather, I will focus on two main questions. First, how will the second generation impacts of the pandemic likely affect conflict? And second, what opportunities for peace building may be present? I will cover 5 quick points under each question. On the impacts, I think we have to accept that the pandemic has exposed fragility in all countries, in our health systems, in our economic, social, and political fabric. Some of the key dynamics that particularly affect conflict risk are the following. First, a still growing economic shock and rising inequality. This shock is the deepest since World War II and the broadest since 1870. The projections for 2020 are continually worsening, and I think we know now that we will be at not 3%, but at a 5 to 6% global contraction. By coincidence, 5 percentage points is the level at which we have seen in research major increases, around 50% in conflict risk. The impact is also exacerbating inequality, generally in society and between different groups, a factor that we also know increases conflict risk. Second, practical problems in convening peace processes and elections. Physical meetings are important for trust and confidence building. The inter-Afghan negotiations, for example, have faced difficulties due to COVID-19 conditions. Disputed elections can be a trigger for conflict, and the pandemic makes disputes more likely because of difficulties in access and in monitoring. Postponing elections is sometimes the only responsible action to take, but this will mean rising pressure for elections in 2021, when we are now likely to see double the number of countries holding elections from what was originally scheduled. In some countries, the pandemic is also seen as acting as a pretext to postpone elections, shrink civic space, and adopt increasingly authoritarian approaches. Third, food insecurity. We already face a global hunger crisis, but at present this is because people do not have incomes to buy food, not because they cannot get food. However, we are seeing local spikes in food prices in conflict zones in many countries, such as Afghanistan, DRC, Syria, and Yemen. Food prices are the typical risk to watch, historically, for conflict risks. Fourth, trends in remittances, trade, and migration. Remittances are projected by the World Bank to decline by $110 billion this year, or equivalent to more than 2/3 of the global ODA budget. Within the 10 countries that depend most on remittance inflows are 8 which are post-conflict or conflict affected, and 3 which are still on the agenda of the Security Council: Haiti, Somalia, and South Sudan. Trade and migration issues post-COVID also have the potential for conflict between countries. Fifth, inequality in access to public health goods. Developing countries' difficulty in procuring PPE, test kits, medicines, and equipment has already widened the gap in the capacity to suppress COVID-19 and has damaged trust, a factor the Secretary-General referred to. This gap is set to widen further when vaccines are found. Current dynamics over vaccine development see developed countries outbidding each other in advance orders, with little capacity left for the developing world. These 5 major drivers of conflict may all increase in the months to come. Many of them are universal, and indeed we have seen tensions rise in rich countries, but they hit disproportionately on already conflict-affected countries. Let me turn to positive opportunities for peace building. My first point is on trust and multilateral action. We are seeing in opinion polls in all regions unprecedented demand for more international collective action. In effect, people have been brutally reminded what we have governments and international cooperation for, that without them there are some forms of crisis that cannot be solved by any one individual or country alone. However, trust bubbles typically last less than a year if no action is taken to sustain them. So this is an opportunity, but it is a time-limited one. My second is around the call for ceasefires issued by the Secretary-General and supported in Resolution 2532. There is still an opportunity to strengthen implementation, because in many countries COVID-19 is far from being under control and humanitarian needs are increasing. The Council could engage more closely with regional and sub-regional bodies, such as the African Union and the RECs, to amplify the call. The Council could also encourage the Secretary-General to report on ceasefire openings and implementation, in line with 2532. Third, there is an opportunity to use a sustaining peace lens from early in the COVID-19 response. The initial health crisis is now an economic crisis, and without careful action can become a political and security crisis. The UN can help, as the Secretary-General laid out, by linking its responses across humanitarian development and peace-building areas, by building local capacities, state citizen and state civil society trust. By embracing conflict-sensitive approaches that are sovereignty supporting, the UN can also help governments address risks before they escalate. For example, through subnational monitoring of food prices, serious investment to allow elections to proceed safely, and reducing inequalities or corruption in the COVID-19 response. Nationally led prevention is also a promising area for greater alignment with the international financial institutions. Fourth, investment in universal health and equal access to vaccines. This is an international, not simply a domestic concern, because the pandemic has taught us that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Domestically, we need to embrace the message that even those well-known revolutionaries at the Financial Times have been writing, that this needs to be paid for by higher taxes from those who have reaped a larger share of recent gains. Internationally, developed countries need to sustain and increase aid, which is still a drop in the bucket compared to domestic stimulus packages, and ensure global access to vaccine and treatment technology. Why raise some of these socioeconomic issues at the Security Council? This is my fifth and last point. These problems may become international threats to peace and security if they are not addressed. The way to get them addressed, to raise their profile, is to raise them in political and security, as well as developmental and human terms. The Council often refers to issues such as pandemics as non-traditional issues. There has, of course, been well-merited resistance to securitizing development. But these issues are not really non-traditional. If you were to ask the world's military agencies, most of them have planned for years for the impact of pandemics, extreme natural disasters, and so forth, as potential security risks. Analysing the risk does not, of course, mean that the Council should try to direct health or economic activities. But this is an example of an extreme public health and economic shock, which deserves to qualify as a peace-building risk. Let the Security Council raise its voice, not to securitise the issue, but precisely so that it does not become an international peace and security disaster. I thank you again, Ibu Retno Marsudi, for the privilege of participating in this meeting. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Cliff for her briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. His Excellency Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Ms. Sarah Cliff, distinguished ministers, excellencies, and representatives of the Security Council members. This pandemic has profound impact to international peace and security. The pandemic has raised the fragility of conflict-affected countries. Some of them are very close to falling back into crisis. Many unresolved conflict drivers may add to the heightening of tension, from inequalities to weak governance, from rampant poverty to poor health infrastructure, from collapsing economy to food shortages. This unprecedented disruption may reverse years of peace-building efforts made. At the same time, the pandemic complicates the work of UN peacekeepers and mediation efforts on the ground. Peace processes may run off the rails. Between February and now, at least 69 countries have decided to postpone their elections, some of which are critical part of a peace process. All in all, peace building and sustaining peace tasks have become even more daunting. Excellencies, with that in mind, allow me to underline 3 important points. First, sustaining peace must be a part of our comprehensive response to this pandemic. It is imperative for us to continue supporting these countries in conflict to take a holistic approach in addressing the interlinkages between health crisis and its implication, from socio-economic to peace security. Our support should focus on strengthening institutional capacities and resources of conflict-affected countries. I should also address unequal access to public health goods and COVID-19 treatments in conflict-affected countries. Competition to acquire COVID-19 vaccine once it exists will only leave them further behind. Moreover, advancing sustaining peace agenda requires inclusive participation of local stakeholders. They have a better understanding on risks of conflict that must be addressed. Conducive international enabling environment is also important to sustain peace during this pandemic, including in my region, Southeast Asia. For this reason, ASEAN foreign ministers issued a joint statement on the 8th of August 2020. The statement of ASEAN underlined the importance of the principle embedded in ZOC1 and TEC for the maintenance of peace and stability in the region amidst current geopolitical dynamics. Second, sustaining peace requires synergy between works of all UN systems. The UN system could no longer work in silo. The UN must respond in coherent manner, harnessing the strength of its different organs. The UN should integrate conflict-sensitive approach into its pandemic response. The Security Council must play its role to ensure the full implementation of Resolution 2532. General cessation of hostilities and humanitarian pause will enable timely delivery of aid and COVID-19 treatment to civilians in conflict. As those directly on the ground, UN peacekeeping operations have the capacity to monitor risks of conflicts that may be exacerbated by this pandemic, serving as part of early warning system. Meanwhile, UN agencies, funds, and programs have technical capacities to address specific conflict drivers during this pandemic. The Peacebuilding Commission, PBC, as the lead UN body in sustaining peace, plays a vital role in coordinating responses across the UN principal organs and beyond, including regional organizations, international financial institutions, and private sectors. The PBC must make use of its advisory role to develop a comprehensive UN strategy to deal with the long-term impacts of COVID-19. Our effort to sustain peace during COVID-19 serve as a valuable input for the review of UN peacebuilding architecture. Third, sustaining peace required smart use of resources. The latest Secretary General report on peacebuilding and sustaining peace documented a decline in the share of ODA dedicated to peacebuilding in conflict-affected countries. The majority of these countries are now faced with a hard choice between spending on health infrastructure or peacebuilding. Therefore, it is important that we optimize the use of limited resources at hand. Partnership between the UN and the international financial institution is vital. At the same time, we need to continue thinking outside the box to explore innovative funding for peacebuilding. The South-South and triangular cooperation and involvement of philanthropists and private sectors. Excellencies, the pandemic may aggravate some conflict dynamics, but I'm an optimist. History taught us that crisis may also create an opening for peace. Let us use this momentum to better sustain peace. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pham Binh Minh, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Vietnam.
Madam President, thank you, and the Indonesian Presidency for convening this meeting. And thank you for inviting the best briefers for this timely and important topic. My special greetings to Secretary General Guterres and former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Madam President, I'm joining this meeting from Hanoi, Vietnam, a country that has seen early success in controlling the COVID-19 pandemic. A whole-of-government approach, strong and determined actions that leave no one behind have helped minimize casualties and impacts. Yet, the recent re-emergence of the coronavirus in Vietnam after 3 months is a stark reminder that no single country can win this battle unless and until everyone wins. Vietnam has been enjoying peace, stability, and long periods of growth for decades. But when the pandemic hit Vietnam, it hit us hard. It put enormous strains on our healthcare system, undermined our socio-economic development. It disrupted every aspect of our lives in unprecedented and unthinkable ways. As such, we can only imagine that level of devastation this pandemic can bring to conflict-affected areas. The pandemic threatens to wipe out hard-won peace-building gains and worsen the already complex and fragile situations, especially the humanitarian situation. Such a multidimensional crisis demands multidimensional solutions. At national level, a whole-of-government approach is needed to tackle the pandemic from a disease control perspective, and at the same time strengthen institutions, build trust, and foster cooperation. Special support must be given to the most vulnerable in conflicts and health crises, particularly the elderly, women and children, persons with disabilities, refugees, and displaced persons. Globally, a threat like COVID-19 can only be curbed by working together through multilateral efforts. Vietnam welcomes the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2532 and the Secretary General appeal for an immediate global ceasefire and facilitation of humanitarian activities. We call for the lifting of sanctions can undermine countries' capacity to respond to COVID-19. We commend UN peace operations for continuing to fulfill their crucial mandates and support host countries despite even more challenging operating environment. We urge the UN peacekeeping building architecture from headquarters to field operations to take coordinated actions and deliver as one. A whole system approach is crucial for the UN to deliver its promises of sustainable peace and development. Sustaining peace in a time of pandemic can generate great impacts even from the smallest action to win the hearts and minds of the local community. I'm particularly moved by the story of a resourceful Vietnamese women peacekeeper in the Central African Republic who made face masks to help protect fellow peacekeepers and the local populations. Lastly, the important role of regional organization cannot be overstated. In Southeast Asia, ASEAN, of which Vietnam and Indonesia are proud members, is taking a whole-of-community approach in fighting the pandemic. ASEAN leaders have reaffirmed their political commitment and taken coordinated measures to protect the health of our citizens, revitalize our economies, and prevent the pandemic from undermining the overall regional peace and stability. Madam President, no one can win this battle against the COVID-19 pandemic alone. Vietnam continues to underscore the critical importance of international solidarity and strengthen cooperation in our response to COVID-19. We are strongly committed and call on all to join hands in this common endeavor. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Min for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Urmas Reinsalu, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Estonia.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to congratulate Indonesia for assuming the Security Council presidency for the month of August and for convening this timely meeting today. And truly respect to all honourable briefers. At the outset, please allow me to say a few words about the very worrying situation in Belarus. The presidential elections in Belarus on Sunday can't be considered free, fair and democratic, as a result we are now witnessing unprecedented nationwide protests and excessive use of force by the government. Let me underline that violent crackdown of peaceful protests is unacceptable, and we call on Belarus to immediately end political repressions against the opposition, to avoid any further violence and to uphold respect for human rights. President, I would like to congratulate Indonesia for assuming the Security Council presidency for the month of August and for convening this time. I agree that the Security Council should not let new challenges to international peace and security fall under its radar. The focus of today's debate on the effects of pandemics, including COVID-19 on conflict prevention, post-conflict recovery and peace building, is therefore very pertinent. Conflict prevention ought to be at the core of the work of the United Nations. Estonia has been continuously advocating for and contributing towards prevention, post-conflict recovery and sustaining peace initiatives. We attach great emphasis to the role of the UN Peacebuilding Commission and the Peacebuilding Fund. Estonia has been supporting the fund's activities since 2013, and we see a great added value in their work contributing to favorable conditions for local organizations to play the necessary role in sustaining peace. We welcome the Peacebuilding Commission's renewed focus on conflict prevention, in addition to its more traditional post-conflict recovery analysis and activities. The advisory role of the Peacebuilding Commission to the Security Council is extremely important and is part of a holistic, cross-UN approach to conflict prevention and resolution. With this in mind, we see room for further strengthening the Commission's advisory role to the Council. Analysis provided by the PBC to the Council would be an important part of an informed decision-making process. Undoubtedly, the COVID-19 pandemic puts an additional burden on already fragile situations. The economic, social and developmental pressures from the pandemic can essentially act as threat multipliers and exacerbate existing tensions. We have already seen this in the Sahel region, where armed and violent extremist groups are cynically abusing the situation for their own advancement. This has in turn multiplied the responsibilities of UN peacekeeping missions. Estonia, together with other EU countries, has pledged its continued commitment to UN peacekeeping during the pandemic, and we urge others, in particular large troop and financial contributors, to follow suit. Peacekeeping missions require our continued uninterrupted support to remain willing and able to operate during this pandemic, to deliver on their mandate, promote conflict resolution, support host states, and protect civilian populations. While it's important to discuss how UN peacekeeping missions could take more pandemic-sensitive approaches, this would only be a part of the equation. For building and sustaining peace activities to be truly sustainable, we need political will and a strong sense of ownership from governments and local communities. Peacebuilding processes need to be inclusive, taking into account the views of local peace builders, especially women and youth, that are often at the forefront of such activities, as well as the ones most affected by the conflict. There are encouraging examples from Afghanistan, Niger, Iraq, and many other locations where the UN has successfully supported local peacebuilding capacities and initiatives, many of them led by women, and this is especially important in the context of coronavirus, which has further exacerbated the vulnerability of the least protected in society. I would also like to stress that women's needs have to be factored into the response to the pandemic, and we need to ensure women's equal representation in all coronavirus response planning and decision-making processes. In conclusion, Madam President, the pandemic will most likely be with us for the foreseeable future. Regardless, we need to continue our work towards creative peace-building efforts, empowering local-level initiatives, and actively making sure that the pandemic is not being used as a pretext for restricting human rights, limiting freedom of movement, or hampering the UN's peacekeeping and peacebuilding efforts. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Reinsalu for his statement. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Naledi Pandor, Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Excellency Secretary General, Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon and Ms. Cliff, thank you very much for the briefings that have been provided this afternoon. Madam President, the world is only just beginning to understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of us are making efforts in a range of international fora to deal with the multitude of adverse impacts. We therefore thank Indonesia through you, Minister Marsudi, for convening this council debate prioritizing sustaining peace in the midst of the pandemic. We also welcome the important briefings that have been provided to us, lending substantial weight to our discussion. As South Africa's government, we and the people of our country have had to learn many lessons from the pandemic. The critical need for international collaboration and for robust multilateral, regional, and continental institutions, as well as the urgency of addressing socioeconomic support in sectors that should be supporting the most vulnerable in our society. We discovered with the advent of the pandemic that there were many gaps, even in areas where we thought we were providing effective socio-development support. There was much that was inadequate. We also found that it is important to have an appropriate legal framework for responsiveness during social emergencies, and that the normal emergency legislation does not serve such circumstances well. We therefore support the Security Council addressing the link between pandemics of this nature as well as peace and security. Reflecting on peace and the pandemic in this forum is, in my view, critical, given the acutely global nature of pandemics in general, as well as the complex array of challenges that emerge from such a pervasive global phenomenon. Responsiveness will require a multiplicity of institutions, a wide range of cooperation across a range of bodies, and it is our view that the United Nations, with a significant global institutional character, is the appropriate body to lead the necessary responses to the impact of the pandemic and the lessons that we have learned. We are deeply concerned by the adverse effects of COVID-19, particularly in conflict situations, those that are the focus of the Council and those that emerge as governments fail to respond effectively. We're concerned at the potential to delay or reverse vital gains in peace and political processes. It is vital, therefore, for the international community to maintain its support to countries affected by conflict in order to preserve gains that have been made and to sustain investments directed at stability and cementing peace building. We believe alongside interventions, stringent attention must be paid to gender inequality, which has emerged as a very visible phenomenon in the impact of the pandemic. We should ensure support for good governance and democracy as part of the armor of responding effectively and building durable institutional capacity to be ready for the next wave of such pandemics. Another such impact area which we believe will require more attention is that of post-conflict reconstruction and sustaining hard-won peace. We believe that all the victories achieved through the work of the Council must be sustained by us being very attentive to those post-conflict societies, particularly those at the early stages of peace, such as South Sudan. We believe particular attention to Sudan as it begins to rebuild itself, so that we do ensure traction in the advances that have emerged in the past few months. We must not lose sight of what it has taken to assist those that are in conflict and to help them extricate themselves from violence and war. In fact, one of the lessons we must learn from this pandemic is that early exit, once peace emerges, is insufficient to the impact of conflict in many societies. And so sustaining partnership and collaboration until a firm foundation for reconstruction is laid is absolutely imperative. The connections that have been a consequence of the pandemic must be used to good effect in the future and should focus on post-conflict reconstruction and development. The focus that we've developed through the African Union in Africa on silencing the guns in Africa is clearly linked to supporting the UN Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire and a humanitarian pause in order to focus due attention on the pandemic and its effects and on attempts to mitigate its impact. The Secretary General's call has been reiterated and emphasized by the African Union, and we believe it is necessary to do so because there is a very close link between peace and development. We must acknowledge and commend the leadership and proactive action of the United Nations, which has put in place measures to protect the health and safety of peacekeepers and to help navigate the effects of the pandemic. We particularly commend the leadership and critical role of the World Health Organization and its Director General, Dr. Ghebreyesus, in preventing and mitigating the broader public health emergency in which peacekeeping and other peace-related activities are embedded. WHO has also worked with our countries on the continent and other developing countries to ensure that we do address the spread and impact of this disease. Madam President, we must also be wary as we intervene to ensure that we do not provide support on the one hand while inhibiting the adequate responses of governments to protect their people from pandemics and to weather economic difficulties and implications on the other. It is for this reason that as South Africa, we strongly support again the Secretary General's call for the waiving of unilateral coercive measures and sanctions in order to allow affected governments and societies to have the requisite resources to secure the much needed life-saving medical supplies and personal protective equipment. We also support calls for debt relief, debt deferral, and robust support for post-pandemic economic recovery, particularly in Africa and many developing countries whose economies are hard hit by the effects of the pandemic. The notion of a comprehensive response to the pandemic must include additional efforts and resources as to how we can refine the engagement of the Security Council, such as in addressing the impact of sanctions, of denial of resources, and of broader issues that become evident as this pandemic's effects take hold. We therefore regard sustaining peace in the context of global pandemics as absolutely linked to concurrently addressing conflict and development simultaneously. Thus, for us, peace is clearly an adjunct to overall political, social, economic, and physical health of societies. We believe that this debate illustrates the interconnectedness that the world should build its collaboration on. We must prioritize sustainable peace, particularly through fora such as the UN Peacebuilding Commission, and work with regional organizations and their peacebuilding counterparts and mechanisms, while also drawing on the broader institutional system of the United Nations multilateral effort. This is vital as we seek to achieve and pursue the Sustainable Development Goals, which do address the root causes of many conflicts confronting the world today. Finally, Madam President, it is only through collaboration and cooperation internationally, in the face of the temptation to look inward, that will allow us to emerge from the current pandemic effectively and as committed world citizens, ensuring that should we be struck by a pandemic of this nature, never again will any nation or people be left behind. Once more, Madam Minister, we thank you for convening this deliberation, and we hope it will lead to greater peace and security for the most marginal and vulnerable of this world. Thank you very much.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Parnell for her statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Niels Annen, Minister of State, German Federal Foreign Office.
Madam President, Your Excellency Minister Masudi, very good to see you again. I also like to thank Indonesia for convening this important debate today. And of course, I would like to thank our excellent briefers, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and Ms. Cliff for their briefings and contributions. Madam President, 6 weeks ago, the Security Council held an open debate on pandemics and security, chaired by German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas. We also recently had an informal exchange on the Council's members with representatives of the Peacebuilding Commission on the impact of COVID-19 on peacebuilding. In both meetings, we called on the Council to adopt a comprehensive understanding of peace and security. I'm therefore grateful to Indonesia for providing us with an opportunity to build on these discussions today. A comprehensive approach to peace and security means also to address root causes and mid- and long-term challenges as opposed to only acute crises. It means the need to find integrated solutions for interconnected challenges and to strengthen prevention, peace building, and sustaining peace, no matter if we are facing human rights violations or a pandemic or climate change as a multidimensional challenges. Madam President, COVID-19 continues to rage across the world. It is a multidimensional challenge that adversely affects humanitarian, health, political, social, economic, and environmental aspects. And it affects peace and security and undermines peace-building efforts in conflict-affected countries in transition. What needs to be done? Allow me to focus on 4 brief points. First, the need for an effective and engaged Security Council. This Council needs to follow up on Resolution 2532, in which the Council explicitly recognizes the COVID-19 might reserve peace-building gains. We should encourage the Secretary General to fully integrate the impact on the pandemic on security in his reporting. Such reporting would support prevention and early warning. The Council should further empower the UN Peacebuilding Commission, which holds a unique mandate within the UN system to enable integrated and cross-pillar approaches. We commend the PBC for its fast response and its excellent track record since the outbreak of the pandemic. We need to ensure that the UN and its presence on the ground, especially the peacekeeping operations and special political missions, are sufficiently equipped and mandated to address the direct and indirect challenges of the pandemic. This is particularly important in the context of transitions such as currently happening in Darfur or Guinea-Bissau. And this is the Council's core business. Second, the need for coordination and coherence. We need integrated peace-building efforts in response to challenges such as COVID-19. And the Secretary General's briefing today, but also his recent report on peace-building and sustaining peace, have demonstrated how the UN system as a whole has adapted in response to the pandemic. However, we need to ensure further progress is in achieving and better conditioning and coherence within the UN systems, its agencies, and funds and programs. There are lessons to be learned from the impact and the response of the pandemic. We believe there is a value in incorporating such lessons into the currently ongoing process of the peace-building architecture review. Third point, peace-building and sustaining peace urgently needs funding. The COVID-19 pandemic has massive, immediate socio-economic repercussions. Peace-building needs are already now underfunded. Peace-building needs are already now underfunded, despite that, in fact, a prevented crisis is much less costly than an acute crisis, as we all know. Germany continues to contribute to peace-building and prevention. For instance, we keep supporting the Secretary General's Peace-Building Fund, where we have just cleared a first contribution of €15 million for 2020. The PBF, with its flexibility and catalytic function, plays a crucial role in meeting critical peace-building needs, such as on gender and inclusivity, cross-border collaboration, and particularly in context of transition. On a bilateral level, Germany has contributed to the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire by supporting additional efforts by its mediation partners on the ground. Gender equality gains are at risk of becoming lost as many governments are diverting funds originally directed at the support of women and girls and their participation in peace processes. As a member of the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Funds Funding Board, Germany supported the establishment of an emergency response window within the fund and made available $2.5 million to this emergency window. Through this window, local women's organizations from countries in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and Europe can apply for funding, which enables them to sustain themselves through the crisis and for programs responding to the pandemic and its gendered dimensions. But these efforts, dear colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, are not enough. To create sustainable and predictable financing for peace building, we need strengthened partnership with the international financial institutions, regional banks, and the private sector. And as donors, we should not forget to make a difference. Donors should coordinate better, use pooled funding if possible, and engage in good peace-building donorship. And my last point, the need for inclusive approaches to build resilience. All efforts will be in vain if they are not based on national ownership. Only in lockstep with the affected countries will we be able to build resilient societies that can better withstand the impact of such a pandemic. The respect for human rights and political processes that are inclusive and allow all parties of society, especially women, youth and marginalized groups, to participate in a meaningful way are crucial in building up such resilience. Madam President, let me conclude on a hopeful note. This pandemic, just like other multidimensional challenges, offers us as international community an opportunity to strengthen cooperation, reinforce multilateralism, and show international solidarity. If we manage to overcome traditional thinking and silos and find integrated and coherent solutions, we will be able to defeat a deadly virus, eventually halt climate change, and hopefully realize a world where everybody can live in peace and security. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Anand for his statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of China.
Madam President, China thanks Indonesia for convening this important meeting. We also welcome you to preside over today's meeting. China thanks the Secretary General for his report and his briefing.
You are the only participant.
We are also very glad to see Mr. Ban Ki-moon is with us today. We thank you, Secretary General, for your thought-provoking contribution. We have also listened very carefully to the remarks by Ms. Sarah Cliff. COVID-19 poses an unprecedented threat to lives and health of people of all countries. The world economy is heading to a recession. The international community's efforts for sustaining peace are facing big challenges. As noted in Insecurity Council Resolution 2532, the pandemic could reverse the peacebuilding and the development gains made by conflict-affected countries. We must step up our efforts to prevail over the pandemic and build back better at an early date. Madam President, solidarity and cooperation is the most powerful weapon in the global fight against COVID-19. Conflict-affected countries are the weakest link in this fight. Helping them build a strong line of defense is most important for ensuring victory over the pandemic and consolidating peacebuilding gains. China calls on all parties to conflict to respond to the Secretary General's appeal for a global ceasefire as soon as possible, not only to lay down their arms and silence the guns, but also to coordinate actions against the COVID-19. We should support the UN and the WHO in mobilizing countries to further strengthen policy coordination and increase resources to help with the preparation and response of the conflict-affected countries. China appreciates and supports the assistance to relevant countries by UN peacekeeping operations. We support the Peacebuilding Commission in providing tailored response and reconstruction programs for the countries. As we encourage the Peacebuilding Fund to reprioritize its projects and resources for that purpose. As we have seen, unilateral sanctions are seriously undermining the basic capacity of targeted countries in responding to the pandemic and safeguarding livelihoods, making innocent civilians the biggest victims. We once again strongly urge relevant countries to acknowledge the negative humanitarian consequences and immediately lift their unilateral coercive measures. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, China has been actively engaged in the global fight. China has been doing its utmost to support and assist the countries in need, including many on the Security Council's agenda. In June, President Xi Jinping chaired an extraordinary China-Africa summit on solidarity against the COVID-19. It demonstrated the determination of China and Africa to fight COVID-19 together. China has decided to cancel the debt of interest-free loans of relevant African countries due by the end of 2020. China has also announced that COVID-19 vaccine development and deployment in China, when available, will be made a global public good. China is ready to continue providing medical supplies to affected countries, share experience in diagnosis and treatment, and send medical experts to assist the country's response. Madam President, facing the impact of COVID-19, we need to better understand sustaining peace, improve and strengthen our approaches to peace building. First, we should always be people-centered. Experience of many countries shows that as long as we put people and life first, we can develop a set of effective methods to fight the pandemic. In peace building, we should also put people's interests front and center, respect the ownership of people of the host countries, and promote an inclusive peace process. Second, we should promote sustaining peace through development. Peace-building process in conflict-affected countries can easily go back to square one after one or two crises due to the country's weak socio-economic foundation. Development is the master key to solve all problems. The international community should attach great importance to the impact of COVID-19 on the socio-economic situation of conflict-affected countries, help them improve the capacity for sustainable peace development, strengthen public health system, and preserve and advance peace-building gains to build a solid foundation for sustaining peace. Third, we should strengthen political leadership and the participation of the whole society. In many countries, strong political leadership and social cohesion have made possible early detection, isolation, diagnosis, and treatment of COVID-19 cases. Rebuilding political consensus, mutual trust, and social cohesion also provides important underpinning for national reconstruction. We need to support strengthening the authority of the legitimate governments of conflict-affected countries so that they can lead the entire society in safeguarding hard-won gains of peace building and achieving long-term security and stability. Madam President, there is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought tremendous impact and challenges to the world. However, we have every reason to believe that humankind will eventually prevail and make the world a better place. To make that happen, we must be united and uphold multilateralism. Countries are dependent on each other and have a shared future. No one can artificially sever the ties that connect us. Unilateralism is a one-way tree heading to a dead end, and there is no other option but turning back. We should give stronger support to the United Nations and better meet challenges and pursue common development through multilateral cooperation. We must uphold justice and the rule of law. Justice is the hope of all and is rooted in the hearts of the people. International law and the norms of international relations are an important guarantee for international fairness and justice. All countries should honor their commitments and fulfill due responsibilities and obligations. We cannot allow practice of power politics, bullying, and exceptionalism to take the world back to an age of the jungle. We must respect science and support technological progress. Advances in science and technology are the common pursuit of humankind. Everyone is entitled to a better life. So are those in developing countries. The practice of putting up artificial barriers to hinder other countries' scientific and technological development and to interfere with market competition for selfish gains is immoral, irresponsible, and against one's own interest. It's our sincere hope that UN members and the international community will act together, show their responsibilities together, share the benefits together, and jointly build a better future for all. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Niger.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation would like to welcome you and thank Indonesia for making this debate possible. This meeting is timely as it comes on the heels of several Security Council and Peacebuilding Commission discussions on the pandemic and the most recent informal interactive dialogue that Niger co-organized with Indonesia alongside Germany. But first, allow me to take a moment to recognize the Secretary General whose call for a global ceasefire and solidarity was a catalyst for the adoption of Resolution 2532. I would also like to thank Mr. Ban Ki-moon and Mrs. Sarah Cliff for their thorough and insightful briefings. Madam President, unfortunately, on the ground, the ceasefire appeal made by the Secretary General is mostly not being heeded by belligerent parties, as shown from the recent attacks by Boko Haram and ISWAP in the Lake Chad Basin and the Sahel. Violent extremists are trying to take advantage of the pandemic to destabilize government by ramping up their attacks on civilian and military targets alike. This trend was corroborated by the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Mohammed Ibn Shambas, during his briefing on the impact of the COVID-19 to the Peacebuilding Commission last April. These acts have caused the loss of innocent lives and major disruption to the delivery of basic social services to the population. In addition to being both a public health and a human crisis, the pandemic is seriously affecting the economy of already fragile countries like those of the G5 Sahel. It is estimated that the gross domestic product
You are the only participant.
could contract by 7 to 8% in 2020 for some countries. As of June, the economic negative impact in Niger had already reached $339 million in lost tax customs and non-tax revenues for more than my country's annual defense budget. Madam President, in terms of impact on the ground, peace operations are being heavily affected by the freeze in rotations and the risk of the spread of the disease among the troops and the populations they are protecting. I would like to take this moment once again to commend the United Nations, MINUSMA and UNOWAS for putting in place strict and effective measures aimed at minimizing and mitigating the impact of the pandemic in the Sahel. Even though the United Nations peace special and political missions are themselves heavily impacted in their operations, the current crisis offers opportunity to adapt and repurpose and even transform the United Nations missions responses so that no one is left behind and the hard-fought gains made in peace process are duly maintained. This starts first and foremost by ensuring that adequate level of funding and financing for peacekeeping missions are maintained to their current level and, if possible, boosted, as the pandemic will further exacerbate the crisis in some regions of the world. Doing so will allow for the adequate troops and personnel levels to be deployed and essential activities to be carried on. Financing should also mean providing the adequate support needed on the multilateral level to those countries so that gains made towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals are preserved. Moreover, the extent to which the current pandemic has impacted the economies of countries will more likely than not lead to a world recession for the next year and beyond. It is therefore imperative that besides the traditional funding mechanism, we encourage innovative means by reducing the fragmentation in peace-building activities and integrating new tools into current approaches. We should support funding approaches that put forth countries on priorities and allow those countries to develop locally ground innovative financing mechanisms. Madam President, when it comes to adaptation, this crisis has shown us that, going forward, a meaningful participation of communities, including women, youth, and persons with disabilities, traditional, religious, and civic leaders is necessary. In times like this, they can be the relay of peacekeeping operations, as they are not only have a first-hand knowledge of the local customs and traditions, but they also have the necessary network and the trust of the local population. We should therefore strive to provide them with the necessary tools in regard to capacity building, technology, and monitoring to ensure that peace-building efforts are continued regardless of these situations. To conclude, Madam President, as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, and amidst the non-traditional nature of this pandemic, when it comes to being a threat to peace and security, thinking outside the box and transforming our approach to peacekeeping must yield positive results. Drivers of conflicts today are different from what they were in 1945 and involve socio-economic, environmental, health, transnational, and technological actors. Adaptation and transformation of peace operations to prevent and mitigate tomorrow's conflict is therefore necessary. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Niger for his statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me first of all thank the Secretary General, the former Secretary General, and Madam Clive for their briefings. Sustaining peace, both a comprehensive process and a goal, has never been an easy task for conflict-affected countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has only magnified this challenge. Human and health costs have soared, socio-economic problems have proliferated, and the challenges of planning, implementation, and follow-up to peace-building efforts have multiplied. Over the last couple of months, we have indeed witnessed unprecedented needs and repeated calls for an urgent and coordinated response. Moreover, on the 1st July, we have unanimously adopted Resolution 2532, recognizing that the pandemic could preserve peace-building gains made by countries in transition and post-conflict countries, and calling for all relevant parts of the UN system to accelerate response to the pandemic. Now is the time to further reflect upon our approach and draw some best practices and lessons learned. In this regard, I want to table 4 points. First, multilateralism. International cooperation, collaboration, and collective responsibility are and remain essential. As long as a pandemic affects one of us, it will affect all of us. Collective problems require collective answers, and such answers can and will only be found if we work together, the UN and its member states, regional and sub-regional organizations, international financial institutions, the private sector, and civil society. Second, if effective multilateralism is based on the shared respect of principles and values, the same should be true for our further approach to the pandemic. COVID-19 should not be used as a pretext to infringe upon human rights or international humanitarian law. COVID restrictions are indeed sometimes disproportional, unlimited in time, and taken without much scientific backing. Third, the whole conflict cycle has been negatively affected by the pandemic. We therefore need to be innovative in all aspects of conflict prevention, peacekeeping, peace building, and sustaining peace in order to preserve the hard-won gains of the past, build resilience, and lay the groundwork for a better future. The Peacebuilding Fund, for instance, was able to add additional funding to an Access to Justice project in Haiti to allow for virtual audiences and facilitate legal arbitration to release detainees. Being innovative requires paying adequate attention to known but intensifying thematic challenges that are closely linked to the pandemic, such as climate and security or mental health, but also to find new ways to secure adequate funding to tackle them, such as exploring further budgetary partnership with the international financial institutions and the private sector. Fourth and lastly, best practices and lessons learned in tackling the pandemic should reinforce our ongoing review of the UN peacebuilding architecture, given its function as both platform and bridge across the whole UN system, as well as its early engagement in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Peacebuilding Commission, but also the Peacebuilding Fund, have been in a unique position to help tackling the pandemic. It is therefore adequate to incorporate their views and recommendations in the review. Efforts undertaken within the context of peacebuilding and sustaining peace can help in order to further increase national and local ownership, counter fragmentation of the UN system and its pillars, and help to foster further partnerships between the UN and other stakeholders. In short, we need to be more strategic, focused, and unified in tackling the pandemic. The peacebuilding architecture can play a crucial role to this end. I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you so much, Madam President.
We can't hear you, President.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium. Now I would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and Ms. Sarah Cliff for their insightful remarks, and we commend the Indonesian presidency for convening this timely discussion. These are extremely challenging times. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to claim lives and livelihoods as it tests our collective resolve as nations, regions, and as an international community. Supply chain disruptions and sharp declines in economic activities have exacerbated inequalities within and among countries, while prolonged lockdowns have produced disastrous implications for humanitarian operations, educational sectors, and other social protections that are critical for sustaining peace. For conflict-affected countries, the pandemic has accentuated security risks as delicate peace agreements have become increasingly fragile, while many warring parties, including armed groups, continue to disregard our shared calls for a global ceasefire as enunciated in Resolution 2532. Under these tenuous circumstances, persons in vulnerable situations have been disproportionately affected by food shortages, high levels of displacement, increases in sexual and gender-based violence, and other humanitarian and protection concerns that threaten to reverse the hard-won peace-building gains in countries affected by and emerging from conflict. Amidst these immense challenges, the United Nations peace-building architecture has played a crucial role to strengthen the institutional arrangements between states and international financial institutions in order to safeguard national development plans, reinforce social contracts, and bolster national ownership over peace processes. These institutional arrangements, geared towards strengthening partnerships and providing predictable and reliable financing, are critical for preventing conflict in many fragile contexts. In this regard, St. Vincent and the Grenadines welcomes the Global Humanitarian Response Plan for COVID-19 and the critical work to building and sustaining peace financed through the Secretary-General's Peacebuilding Fund. However, both remain significantly underfunded, and we urge donor countries and the international private sector to renew their efforts to provide financial support to these essential institutional mechanisms, which provide a critical lifeline for many in precarious situations. In order to ensure that conflict-affected countries are able to mend their social fabrics, advance political processes, strengthen institutions, restore state authority, and provide justice and prosperity to all in accordance with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we encourage the international donor community to honor their overseas development assistance commitments and to explore additional pathways for providing debt relief. We also echo the joint appeals of the UN Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as the recent calls by the Panel of Human Rights Special Rapporteurs for the discontinuation of all unilateral coercive measures that impede countries' abilities to address the pandemic. Sanctions create unnecessary suffering in vulnerable societies and serve to undermine national ownership and global cooperation, the most basic tenets of sustaining peace. Mr. President, while we continue to grapple with the peace-building implications of COVID-19, we must renew our efforts to protect the most vulnerable. Concurrently, we must also maintain a watchful eye on other menacing threats, such as climate change, that add further complexity to our 21st century security landscape. As we look towards the intergovernmental phase of the 2020 review of the peace-building architecture, we must work to further strengthen the synergies across the UN system, including by exploring new modalities through the Economic and Social Council for mobilizing comprehensive development responses to peace-building challenges at the national and regional levels. Only by strengthening and mainstreaming a cohesive and integrated approach across the peace, security, and development nexus can we provide the inclusive, people-centered, and climate-informed solutions needed to sustain peace. I conclude, Mr. President, by echoing what the distinguished Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia said earlier today. Crises can also provide an opportunity for peace. Let us not waste this opportunity. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now I would like to invite the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we welcome the participation in today's discussion of your minister and some other dignitaries that spoke earlier. We thank you for the convening of this meeting and welcome it. We wish to express appreciation to our today's briefers, UN Secretary General, former Secretary General and Deputy Chair of the Elders, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, as well as Director of Center on International Cooperation in New York University, Ms. Sarah Cliff, for providing information and assessments on the impact of COVID-19 on peace building and sustaining peace. Mr. President, I learned that one of the earlier speakers used today's discussion, today's debate, to introduce a topic which is completely extraneous to the subject of today's discussion, and we would encourage you, Mr. President, to discourage those speakers who want to abuse Security Council meetings to stay within the topic of announced agenda. Mr. President, we are witnessing that COVID pandemics can exacerbate the humanitarian consequences in armed conflict and post-conflict countries. It leads to a wide range of challenges, including food insecurity, detrimental effects for national public health systems, difficulties in the peacekeeping and special political missions, slowdown of peace processes. We wish to remind that the Security Council, in its response to the Ebola outbreak several years ago, introduced specific measures into resolutions on Liberia and in DRC, which contributed to containing the dissemination of the virus and mitigating its consequences with the assistance from the UN and the international community. It proves the effectiveness of the Security Council reaction to pandemics in country-specific rather than in generic context. Professional response, mitigation, and recovery efforts should be exercised by the competent UN bodies that are responsible for those aspects. Particularly, we wish to underline in this regard the crucial role of the World Health Organization in ensuring the coherence of the multilateral response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact, especially the medical aspects of the global response to the outbreak of the coronavirus disease. We believe that the international community should jointly support the work of the WHO. Mr. President, undoubtedly, the implications of pandemics impede the ability of some countries to fully implement their planned peace-building programs and policies, and the gains achieved prior to the COVID-19 outbreak are at risk of being reversed, in particular due to unpredictable, long-standing socio-economic consequences. The Secretary General, in his report, Shared Responsibilities, Global Solidarity, Responding to the Socio-Economic Impacts of COVID-19 of March 2020, proposed specific measures concerning the response to the potential impact of the COVID-19. We supported most of those measures. We have also fully supported the Secretary General's appeal to a global ceasefire. At the same time, we are concerned by the reported attempts of illegal armed groups to take advantage of the situation with pandemic, to obtain benefits on the ground and undermine peace processes. In particular, increased terrorist activities was reported in the Sahara-Sahel region. Therefore, it is important that the humanitarian pause and cessation of hostilities do not apply to counter-terrorism operations, as stated in the Security Council Resolution 2532. We appreciate the efforts by the Secretariat to promote health and safety of UN personnel in the field, contributing the domestic COVID-19 response and recovery efforts in countries emerging from conflict. It is necessary to ensure the continuity and effectiveness of the UN peace-building efforts while strictly adhering to the applicable public health guidance. In this regard, the Peacebuilding Commission could help in mobilizing financial support to strengthen the overstretched national health systems upon the request of host governments. Comprehensive analysis conducted together with national authorities of the adverse socio-economic impact of the pandemic and its possible implications for the overall situation and humanitarian needs in a specific country, considered by the PBC, could also be valuable. Mr. President, one of the urgent measures in the above-mentioned Secretary General's report on shared responsibilities was the need of waiving sanctions, which seriously limit the capacity of the affected countries to respond to challenges related to the pandemic. We reaffirm our support to these proposals by the Secretary General and wish to stress dangerous and aggravating socio-economic effects of unilateral sanctions on sustaining peace, primarily in developing countries. Such restrictions impede the ability of countries to finance their activities in peace-building and development dimensions. Lifting of such sanctions would allow these countries to increase effectiveness in responding to the challenges provoked by COVID-19. We propose that the UN Secretariat prepares a policy brief on the impact of sanctions on the struggle against COVID-19, which could include an assessment of the negative consequences of coercive measures on peace building and sustaining peace. Mr. President, Russia maintains its contribution to the global efforts aimed at countering the current pandemic and its consequences. We partner with the World Health Organization in order to financially support its COVID-19 responses and promote compliance with the international health regulations. Our country also collaborates with the World Food Programme and the UN Development Programme in this respect. Through multilateral channels, Russia allocated more than $30 million to foster responses to the pandemic. We also continue our bilateral assistance to the countries in need by providing personal protective equipment, test systems, and laboratory supplies, and sending medical teams upon request. Yesterday, Russia officially formalized the first COVID-19 vaccine registration in the world. The clinical tests have shown high levels of its efficiency and safety. Several other promising vaccines are being prepared for clinical tests. Besides, several Russian antiviral agents for COVID-19 treatment, as well as diagnostics, are already registered in our country. We are ready for international cooperation with all interested partners in development and introduction of vaccines and medicines to ensure coordinated global response to the spread of COVID-19 and a joint victory over the pandemic. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Now I would like to invite the distinguished representative of France. France, you have the floor, Anne.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I will deliver my remarks in French, and the English version is being circulated to Council members. Monsieur le Président, je remercie l'Indonésie et votre ministre, qui nous a honorés de sa présence, d'avoir pris l'initiative de cette réunion très opportune, et remercie les intervenants pour leur brillante exposé sur les défis posés par la pandémie de Covid au plan de la paix et de la sécurité. L'adoption récente de la résolution 2532 sur la pandémie de Covid-19, portée par la Tunisie et par la France, a été une étape cruciale. Elle a mis en lumière notre responsabilité collective et notre unité face à cette crise sans précédent. Le Conseil a ainsi envoyé un signal clair en soutien à l'appel du secrétaire général. C'est également une exigence renouvelée vis-à-vis de l'action collective multilatérale. Monsieur le Président, l'appel du secrétaire général au sursaut du multilatéralisme et à la solidarité internationale a montré le chemin. 75 ans après l'adoption de la Charte, il y a urgence à renouer avec l'esprit de San Francisco. Nous devons à présent passer de la parole aux actes. Avec la Tunisie, la France appelle ainsi à la mise en œuvre collective, intégrée et coordonnée de la résolution 2532. C'est la responsabilité des membres de ce Conseil, mais aussi de l'ensemble des Nations Unies, en particulier dans leur engagement de prévention des conflits, de médiation et dans leurs activités humanitaires. La Commission de consolidation de la paix a également un rôle important à jouer et le Fonds de consolidation de la paix est un outil qui a fait la preuve de sa pertinence et de son efficacité et que nous soutenons pleinement. Je voudrais évoquer à cet égard notre responsabilité vis-à-vis des pays fragiles et en crise. Ces pays, en situation de conflit ou de post-conflit, sont particulièrement à risque dans le contexte de la pandémie. La Covid et les mesures prises pour l'endiguer ont pu alimenter les tensions, engendrer des discours haineux, voire des violences. Elles ont généré de fausses rumeurs, des récits anxiogènes et des actions de désinformation, alors que certains ont été tentés de profiter de la pandémie pour restreindre les libertés publiques. La pandémie a aussi mis à mal la confiance dans les institutions et la résilience économique des plus vulnérables. Il nous revient de réfléchir collectivement aux moyens de lutter contre ces menaces. Monsieur le Président, un des éléments clés de la stabilité de ces pays est la résilience de leur système de santé. Nous devons à cet égard soutenir les efforts engagés par les Nations Unies et par l'OMS. L'OMS doit être confortée dans son rôle normatif, dans son rôle d'alerte et de coordination. Cela n'exclut pas, le temps venu, de tirer les leçons de la gestion de la crise actuelle et d'engager les réformes nécessaires. La France est engagée aux côtés des Nations Unies pour soutenir les populations vulnérables touchées par la Covid-19. La France a engagé 500 millions d'euros dans le projet ACT-A, dont elle a été à l'initiative pour accélérer le développement et l'accès aux traitements, diagnostics et vaccins contre la Covid-19. Je souhaite enfin réitérer l'importance de l'intégration d'une perspective de genre dans la réponse à la crise que nous traversons et de porter une attention particulière aux femmes et à la jeunesse. Nous devons prendre en compte leurs besoins spécifiques dans la réponse à la pandémie et garantir leur participation pleine, active et effective à tous les niveaux de décision afin de reconstruire de manière durable et égalitaire. La France contribuera activement à cette réflexion, notamment à travers l'organisation dans les mois à venir du Forum de Paris pour la paix en novembre prochain, puis, en partenariat avec ONU Femmes et le Mexique, du Forum Génération Égalité. Monsieur le secrétaire général, Monsieur le Président, nous savons la solution à cette crise et à plus long terme, la construction d'une paix durable n'est pas dans le repli sur soi, mais dans une coopération accrue et dans la redynamisation du système multilatéral. Vous pouvez compter sur le soutien et la détermination de la France. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Franz. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Tunisia. Tunisia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank Indonesia for convening this timely debate, and I thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and Ms. Sarah Cliff for their insightful briefings. Mr. President, the pandemic caused by coronavirus disease is a massive global crisis and an unprecedented challenge, posing significant threat to international peace and security and entailing a health catastrophe, a profound economic turndown, and serious risks for instability. It is affecting food security, employment, and livelihoods. It also contributes in eroding social cohesion and potentially exacerbates underlying tensions. Despite the global nature of this pandemic, which is affecting all the countries without exception, it is hurting mostly those already suffering from conflicts, violence, and unrest. It poses grave risks for traumatized and vulnerable populations of refugees and displaced people. And as Secretary General observed, it threatens to stress typical root causes and underlying fragilities that can lead to exacerbate conflict, which are the focus of peace-building interventions. All these aspects of the crisis contribute directly or indirectly in amplifying the challenges of sustaining peace. In this connection, this pandemic posed serious threats to peace processes and transitions to peace and stability now underway. Moreover, there has been disruptions and difficulties for UN peacekeeping operations and an upsurge in armed conflicts in some hotbeds of tension during the pandemic, driving further displacement and compounding already dire humanitarian situation. Mr. President, the Secretary General called for an immediate global ceasefire on March 23rd to silence the guns and focus together on the true fight of our lives. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, Tunisia has warned of the unprecedented and multidimensional impacts of the pandemic and the challenges it poses on sustaining peace and security, especially in war-ravaged countries in post-conflict situations facing humanitarian. Its full support to the Secretary General appeal and considered its immediate implementation a crucial priority. In this connection, Tunisia focused on the pivotal role of the Security Council in these critical circumstances in preventing peace and security, silencing the guns in all the corners of the world, ensuring the continuation of peacekeeping and special political missions, and creating conditions for the delivery of life-saving and medical aid to people in places with high vulnerability. Accordingly, Tunisia has initiated with France the 2532 resolution, which was unanimously adopted on July 1st. The 2532 resolution said that the unprecedented extent of the COVID pandemic is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security. It also recognized that peace building and development gains made by countries in transitions and post-conflict countries could be reversed as a result of the pandemic. We believe that mitigating the impacts of the pandemic and addressing the challenges on sustaining peace should be within a comprehensive multidimensional approach and guided by our collective political will and our interest in enhancing solidarity and cooperation on international, regional, and national levels. In this context, we stress the importance of the implementation of the 2532 resolution and the exploration of more effective support for war-devastated and post-conflict countries in order to contain the impact of the pandemic, made positive progress of stabilization efforts and peaceful resolution of conflicts. is sustainable when it is locally owned, led, and implemented. It is crucial to focus on strengthening local conflict mechanisms, political peace processes, and engagement of women and youth in peace-building activities, COVID-19 responses, and inclusive dialogues. In the same vein, we stress the importance of promoting cooperation and partnership between the UN and regional and
Scott, could you check?
Yeah, because the video was interrupted. In addition to their role in achieving and monitoring peace agreements, Mr. President, in conclusion, we reiterate Tunisia's firm commitment to continue its active engagement in supporting all the initiatives and efforts aiming at addressing the impacts of the pandemic and maintaining peace and security in all over the world. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. Now I would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States. You have the floor, Sherry.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we very much appreciate your Minister Marsoudi for holding the meeting this morning. We also appreciate Indonesia for continuing the security discussion on the COVID-19 pandemic. And thank Secretary General, former Secretary General Bond, for your briefings today. It is difficult to put into words the deep and profound sorrow we feel over the deaths, illnesses, and other terrible consequences as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, including those affecting healthcare and humanitarian personnel that put lives on the line every day. They have given to a cause far greater, and our hearts and prayers go out to the families and communities during this difficult time. Mr. President, we adopted Resolution 2532 a little over a month ago, supporting the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire to secure a respite for countries and regions that weakened by violence and conflict, especially vulnerable to the virus. We should now reflect on how the pandemic has affected particularly sensitive issues and areas. I'll start by saying we're pleased that several armed groups declared ceasefires to heed the Secretary General's call, even before the Security Council adopted the resolution. As early as
Scott, can you check?
I had very choppy sound throughout that intervention, President. You may wish to go to the next speaker, Dominican Republic, and then we come back. Hopefully that connection will be strengthened.
All right. United States, is Sherry coming back?
Yeah, please go ahead and she'll try to get back on. Thank you.
Okay. Now, while waiting for the United States, I would like to give the floor to the Dominican Republic. Ambassador Jose, you have the floor.
Mr. President, our appreciation to Indonesia for your leadership on this issue and for the organization of this debate. I would like to welcome Minister Pandor and thanks Ms. Cliff for her briefing. As the Secretary General has pointed out, COVID-19 is more than a health crisis. It is a multidimensional with complex, intertwined consequences and challenges to peacebuilding. It could, unfortunately, exacerbate drivers of conflict. As Resolution 2532 recognizes, peacebuilding and development gains made by countries in transition in post-conflict countries could be reversed as a result of the pandemic. COVID-19 has brought with it a devastating human toll way beyond public health. In fragile, conflict-affected countries, it is upsetting economies and societies by further aggravating the causes of conflict, and the shrinking of humanitarian space is worrisome. Gender-based violence is escalating as well as other human rights violations. This illustrates the significance of this debate while we are also getting closer to the 2020 Peace Architecture Review. This pandemic has uncovered structural inequalities within societies and the existing disproportionalities in access to basic services, including education. People affected by conflict are amongst the most vulnerable and more at risk. Of particular importance is the strengthening of international cooperation. This includes South-South and triangular cooperation, work across the humanitarian development peace nexus, and put into practice the Secretary General's report, shared responsibility, global solidarity. Sharing lessons learned and good practices within and across countries and regions is key. In this context, one of the main concepts that needs to be incorporated in any recovery and response to COVID-19 is a peace-building dimension. The Dominican Republic has consistently stressed how crucial a global, coordinated, and unified response among countries and regions is. Partnership for peace-building and sustaining peace is also crucial, precisely with civil society, international financial institutions, academia, the private sector, donors, decision-makers, and local communities. All these actors must come together to better articulate their comparative advantages and develop mechanisms that will ensure a strong peace-building field. The Peacebuilding Commission has served as an exemplary platform in this respect, constantly brainstorming with different actors in how to enhance response and support particular countries and regions. We reiterate the importance of the PBC advice to this Council on the matter, also amplifying the UN system-wide engagement. Mr. President, funding partners must aim at long-term benefits of peace and not short-term support. We commend the work of many international financial institutions supporting risk mitigation in the most fragile settings, in particular the Peacebuilding Fund, which provided timely support and made interventions in supporting countries to address COVID-19. Part of the solution is a response and programming to the pandemic that is conflict-sensitive and risk-informed, context-specific, and in line with the needs of local communities, precisely of the most vulnerable and marginalized. This is crucial so that the pandemic does not bring detrimental consequences to peace-building efforts, and that gains in this respect are not undermined. Overly securitized responses must not be deployed, nor any measures be put in place to curtail or shrink civil space. Every approach should be on the basis of do not harm and be conflict and gender sensitive, as well as people-centered, while taking advantage of the expertise of civil society, precisely of women and youth groups. Women's participation is central to achieving sustainable solutions. The pandemic has shed more light on how critical the WPS agenda is to peacebuilding and sustaining peace. And as we celebrate today the International Youth Day under the theme Youth Engagement for Global Action, it is relevant to remind this Council that young people, as reaffirmed in Resolution 2532 and 2535, play a vital role in peacebuilding and sustaining peace. Their vision is not to bounce back from this pandemic, but to build back better. In following this approach, learning from past examples that presented the space for actors to achieve central peacebuilding objectives, such as the Ebola crisis, we should view COVID-19 as a window of opportunity for peacebuilding identified. pathways to be reinforced, and ways to make COVID-19 contribute to strengthening peace and social cohesion. And I want to finish. I would like to repeat a quote from Sarah Cliff, which says, "Pandemic taught us that no one is safe till all of us are safe." I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic for his statement. And I want to check with the representative of the United States. Are you going to deliver the statement or share it?
Yeah, she wasn't able to get back on yet. I will go ahead and finish the remainder of her remarks.
All right. You have the floor.
All right. We adopted Resolution 2532 a little over a month ago, supporting the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire to secure a respite for the countries and regions that, weakened by violence and conflict, are especially vulnerable to the virus. We should now reflect on how the pandemic has affected particularly sensitive areas. I'll start by saying that we were pleased that several armed groups declared ceasefires to heed the Secretary General's call even before the Security Council adopted the resolution. As early as April, fighters in 12 countries had put down their weapons, including those involved in some of the world's most intractable conflicts. Unfortunately, as we know, many of these ceasefires are beginning to fall apart, including in the Philippines. We also note with deep concern the recent escalation of violence between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and have called on the sides to resume substantive negotiations to resolve the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict as soon as possible. We strongly urge governments and other actors around the world to respect existing ceasefires or to agree on new ceasefire arrangements so that they may focus on addressing COVID-19 and protecting their citizens. We strongly condemn the terrorist organizations that seek to take advantage of this difficult situation. What a terrible thing in the middle of this pandemic, as legitimate governments focus on containing the virus, that these organizations are working to advance their recruitment efforts and carry out criminal, unjustifiable acts. For example, we have seen racially or ethnically motivated terrorist groups and actors advancing their interests by spreading disinformation and conspiracies regarding the virus outbreak and the spread of the virus. It is inconceivable how anyone can be so evil. That's what we're up against. ISIS has exploited security gaps in Iraq caused by the pandemic to relaunch a sustained insurgency. Through propaganda, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups have used the pandemic as a recruiting tool. We will continue our legitimate and lawful operations and actions against those terrorist groups that threaten peace everywhere. As the world's largest humanitarian donor, the United States remains unwavering in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to support critical programs in health, water and sanitation, and protection. We take seriously the Secretary General's warning of a generational catastrophe due to ongoing school closures that have affected more than 1 billion students. We are working directly with those on the ground combating this virus, including governments, multilateral organizations, faith-based organizations, NGOs, the private sector, research institutions, and other organizations. At the same time, we look to meaningfully address other risks that may be exacerbated by the pandemic. The United States has already announced more than $1.6 billion in additional economic, health, and humanitarian aid toward our commitment of nearly $2 billion in U.S. foreign assistance to combat COVID-19. This assistance is part of more than $12 billion provided by the U.S. government to benefit the global response, including through vaccine and therapeutics development, preparedness efforts, and humanitarian assistance. This is in addition to more than $170 billion in U.S. investments in global health and humanitarian assistance over the last 10 years. Indeed, the United States has been the world leader in such assistance by a large margin. The international community must remain equally committed to maintaining our responses to other ongoing humanitarian crises as well. This virus has not only claimed lives, but crippled economies around the world. Vulnerable and marginalized populations, including here in the United States, have been hit particularly hard by these secondary effects. When we consider how to best manage future pandemics and limit their impact on international security, We must learn from our experiences of COVID-19 and recognize the vital importance of transparency. It is also crucial to ensure protections are in place for populations in conflict areas and for at-risk groups. We must not let this virus stall long-standing efforts towards peace and security. We must not let it divide us. Together with our UN and other international partners, the Trump administration will continue leading the fight against this virus during this critical time, and will do all we can to ensure a world that is safer and more secure now and in the future. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. Now I would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to Indonesia for convening this debate at this time. My apologies to our briefers that I was not able to hear their briefing in person. I can see a slightly pixelated version of Sarah, so I will no doubt get to hear from her as often as possible. Mr. President, COVID-19 presents a crisis of unprecedented scope and complexity. It has triggered health, humanitarian, economic, social, development, political, and security challenges with both immediate and long-term ramifications. And we are seeing how interwoven those challenges are. To quote from a recent crisis group article, it would be a brave ambassador at the UN who would bet that the health, economic, and social fallout from COVID-19 will not lead to more political instability. That's why we have to get this response right, because if we don't, we may end up in a scenario which sees decades of progress on peace and development reversed amidst protracted turmoil and human suffering. As a member of this council, and the only leading economy which meets the 0.7% ODA target, the United Kingdom is committed to doing everything we can to avoid countries tipping into crisis. With COVID-19, this means playing our part to ensure coordinated, comprehensive, and collaborative multilateral action. It means prioritizing support to countries most vulnerable to shocks. It means ensuring risk-informed, calibrated responses and mobilizing to prevent crises in the spirit of solidarity. Mr. President, the United Kingdom is concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on the world's most vulnerable people, and we are reprioritizing many of our existing programs accordingly. Despite pressures on the global economy, we must mobilize resources for countries most in need. That's why, working with India, the United Kingdom pushed for an ambitious G20 action plan, including a $200 billion package of support from the World Bank and regional development banks for investment in health programs and emergency fiscal support for the poorest countries. As work on a vaccine continues at pace, we should also keep striving for a framework which ensures equitable access for the world's most vulnerable people. Mr. President, as I raised during the recent dialogue between the Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission, co-hosted with Germany, Niger, and of course your good self as President of the Council, the United Kingdom believes that the UN system still needs to do more to integrate peacebuilding and conflict sensitivity into the global humanitarian, economic, and developmental responses to COVID-19. This means the United Nations and its partners supporting countries to generate a shared appreciation of conflict risks, to ensure that responses do not inadvertently exacerbate drivers of instability. It means continuing to prioritize issues that we know to be central to the social contract which underpins resilience: good governance, inclusion, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. And it means seizing opportunities for dedicated efforts to diffuse conflict and build on peace initiatives. We should all be ready in this council to take whatever action we can to support the United Nations in ensuring that countries do not tip into instability, or that if we can help them build a path away from it. Now, I am sorry to have missed the Secretary General earlier today, but I do want to reiterate the request we made in that meeting that the Secretary General provides further guidance to the UN system on this matter in the form of a policy brief on this approach. The United Nations cannot prevent the loss of peace and development gains single-handedly. We need to work together to prevent destabilization. And the UK is gravely concerned about the rising risk of famine in 2020, hastened by the impact of COVID-19. We will work closely with partners to do everything we can, not only to prepare for, but also to prevent catastrophic food insecurity and related instability. But the complexity of the COVID-19 crisis makes collaboration between the UN and the international financial institutions critical for an effective international response. The macroeconomic responses led by the IFIs and the socio-economic responses spearheaded by the UN should be playing complementary roles. Again, this requires as its starting point a shared understanding of risks and opportunity based on common analysis, and with that common approach mainstreamed throughout, not only at the very top, not only at field level, but at all levels in between. Mr. President, we have said previously that COVID-19 represents a real test of the UN reforms initiated by the Secretary-General. It has brought into even sharper relief the importance of a one UN approach and cross-pillar work to build and sustain peace. These concerns have been at the heart of our engagement with the 2020 Peacebuilding Architecture Review, and I take this opportunity to thank the Secretary-General for his 2020 report. I also take this opportunity to recognise the work of Canada as chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. We have been impressed with the agility of the Peacebuilding Commission in its response to COVID-19, at a time when other UN bodies, including, dare I say it, this Council, have been rather slower. As this debate highlights, Mr. President, the peace-building approach is not just a nice-to-have. It is critical, it is fundamental to responding effectively to the most pressing challenges of our time. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. And as I see, there are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. Once again, on behalf of Indonesia, I would like to thank all that have participated in today's open debate. Once again, thank you very much for coming, and the meeting is adjourned.